It's nice to see so many people here to remember my dad. There are so many people who cared about him deeply. I always knew that he was loved, but over the past few weeks, I've really come to understand just how loved and respected he was. In fact, if you have some quiet time some night, there's something I'd really encourage you to do. Go on to Facebook, if you don't have it, borrow somebody's, and read the comments under the post that Terry made about my dad's passing. Last time I checked, there were 350 comments. The love and respect you read in those comments is incredible. People refer to him as a Sedona treasure, an absolute gem, one of a kind, humbly genuine, and beautifully human. And that's just a small sample. So you guys can't cry, because if I see you cry, then I'm going to. And Deborah once told me I was an ugly crier, so I don't want to do that.
So just ugly, period.
A lot of you knew the headline stuff, the volunteer Sedona Police Force, the Marco Island players, being the yacht club Commodore, the whole pilot and sailor side of him. But those comments, that's where the real Fred shines through. So truly thank you for sharing those memories and putting words to what so many of us felt. And if you're one of the people who left a message, thank you. Those words have meant a lot to our family and especially to Terry. So yes, we all know about the Fred that you could read about in an obituary or a newspaper, but I want to share a few things that you might not know. So if you just hang with me for a few minutes, I want to tell you about the dad that Deborah and I knew at home, the everyday moments that don't make it into a newspaper. And I'm sure some of these will remind you of your own memories that you had with him. My dad was always calm, cool, and collected in every situation. Well, almost. When I was about 10, we went to a Cleveland Indians doubleheader one afternoon in July. Little did I know that he had a purpose, and that was to give me the facts of life talk in between games of the doubleheader. He was unusually quiet during the first game, and I was thinking, wow, he's really into this game. When in reality, he was rehearsing the whole speech in his head. Towards the end of that game, the talk happened in the break in between games. And by the time the break was over, I sat there in stunned silence. But my dad was smiling, knowing he had just completed one of the more difficult parental milestones. Then, with his task complete, he settled in to watch another Cleveland Indians loss. Dad was orphaned as a young teenager, and he helped take care of his two little brothers. The brothers were adopted, but no one really wanted to adopt a teenage boy back then. So he ended up living alone in a trailer. That's a lot for anyone, especially at that age. And Dad would be the first to tell you it was a challenge in more ways than one, especially when it came to dating. It's hard to ask a girl out when the parents know you live on your own, especially in a trailer. It made meeting the parents a little bit tougher, but he was always good at making people feel at ease once they knew him. Fun fact, he went to Michigan State on a swimming scholarship. And we're all grateful to the admissions department because while attending Michigan State, he had a job waiting tables at the AOPI sorority house, where he waited on my mom and her sorority sisters at dinner. And while doing his waiter duties, Joy caught his eye one day, and eventually he worked up the nerve to ask her out. And I'm pretty sure my mom's water glass never went empty. Fred was right there filling it after every sip, like he was saying, I don't have a pickup line, but I'm very attentive. And with Dad, that wasn't just a strategy, that was genuinely him. He was also a great pilot, especially when things got stressful. One time we were in our tiny Cessna 172 heading home from one of our vacations. My dad in the pilot seat, my mom in the co-pilot seat, and Deborah and me in the back. We took off right after breakfast. I don't know what was in that oatmeal that Deborah and I ate that morning, but right as we were making our ascent after takeoff, Deborah started throwing up all over the back seat.
You started.
The sight and smell of what was coming out of her mouth was too much for me, and I started throwing up too. Unfortunately, we both traded a couple rounds. Pretty soon there was half-digested oatmeal all over the cabin of the plane. And there's Dad up front, setting flaps, watching the gauges, and keeping his family safe and airborne. Thank goodness for my mom also, who had the unfortunate task to clean it all up. Speaking of my mom, my sweet mom loved to knit. She knitted things for all of us. Deborah had a knitted poncho, and I had knitted turtleneck sweaters. And my dad got knitted ties to wear to work. If you've never seen a knitted tie, just try to picture it for a second. I learned something about the sacrifices you make for marriage when he'd walk out the door wearing one with a suit like it was totally normal. watched Mad Men, picture Don Draper with a knitted tie. I can still see that uneasy smile he would give when my mom suggested that he wear one of her knitted ties while he was getting ready in the morning. The smile that said, "I love you, Joy, and I really hope you don't knit a belt, too." Even at a young age, I knew he loved my mom dearly when I saw him walking out the door in his suit and a bright orange knitted tie. Fast forward several years, sometimes I would call him on my way home from work and he would sound very tired. He'd explain that he had a prisoner transport overnight and didn't get home until 5 a.m. or so. And then I would climb on my soapbox and say, "Dad, doesn't the police department have a better solution than waking up an 80-year-old man to drive a felon across the state of Arizona in the middle of the night?" But he always answered the same, proud, steady, and a little amused that I was worried. He'd tell me how honored he felt to be part of the police force and how much it meant to him to contribute in a real way. And even when it was hard and he was exhausted, you could hear it in his voice that he loved that job and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Deborah and I were really lucky. We grew up with 2 wonderful parents. We took family vacations. We did fun stuff on the weekends. We actually ate dinner together as a family. And yes, we survived the dreaded quizzes from Parents Magazine. Dad also loved to quiz us on what was on the front page of the paper that day. And when Deborah and I would fight, we were tasked with picking up leaves in the backyard one by one with our hands. At the time, we may have dreaded those things, but looking back, they were gifts. They taught us that family means showing up at the table, paying attention, and keeping your mind curious. Those little routines shaped who we became and show why we're so grateful. Many of you know that when my mom got sick, my dad took care of her 24/7. He fed her, got her dressed, helped her into bed, took her places in her chair. He truly devoted himself to her. When she passed, it was really hard for him to let her go. He grieved for a long, long time, spending lonely nights at the Mesa Grill, wondering why her, why me, why us. And I know many of you walked alongside our family during that time too, and we didn't forget that. I think in a way, he felt that if he wasn't sad, he wasn't being fair to her memory. People would tell him that Joy wouldn't want him to be sad, and they were right, but it was still hard for him to let go. Until one day, Terry showed up. I was here in Sedona visiting, and Dad took me to the St. Patrick's Day parade. He was still in kind of a funk. We're standing on the side of the road, watching the floats and the bands go by, and suddenly the parade stops, because the car right in front of us stops. A woman jumps out, runs over, gives my dad a huge hug, and then runs back to the convertible she's riding in. The parade starts moving again like nothing happened. I looked at my dad and I said, "Who was that?" He shrugged and mumbled something like it was no big deal. Well, that was Terry. And not long after that, I started to realize she wasn't just someone he knew, she was becoming a big part of his life, and that funk lifted. Before long, Terry and Fred were out and about constantly on the Sedona social circuit. Dad was more involved in the city than ever, building even more on the legend of Fred. From there, he and Terry were inseparable. They did everything together, from entertaining to volunteer service to even creating Freddie Frankel sauce. Their home is a shrine to their relationship. Deborah and I really can't thank Terry enough for how much love and care she gave Dad, right from the beginning all the way to the end. The last few months were a lot of work, and she never questioned it for a second. She did it out of love, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. I'll end with one more thing about my dad. He had a saying for everything, as most of you probably know. One time I visited him in his office, and there was literally a wall dedicated to sayings. He called it Threads from Fred. When something went wrong, he would just shrug and say, "Well, it's better than a peck in the head with a sharp stick." And if you complained about how terrible you looked in your school pictures, he'd say, "Well, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." And whenever you got off the phone with him, he'd always say, "Bye-bye for now," like he never wanted it to feel like a final goodbye. So just like the advice he got, don't be sad for him. Be happy for these kind of memories that we all have. That's how we'd want it. And so Dad, speaking for everybody, bye-bye for now.